Hi, my name is Kate, and I will be covering Chapter 1 and 2. In an ordinary age, Rainsford Stouffer talks about the pressure that young adults feel to live extraordinary lives. She explains how society connects success, identity, and self worth to their work, productivity, and achievement in life. The book argues that many adults feel overwhelmed because they are constantly told that they need to stand out, work harder, and create this perfect future. She uses personal stories, expert interviews, and research to explain how pressure from school, work, economic struggles, as well as social media impacts young adults today. Chapter 1 on Being Ordinary focuses on mental health crisis among young adults today. They struggle with unrealistic expectations to live their best life. They were expected to succeed in school and work, be active in their social life, become financially independent, and to always improve themselves. Stouffer explained that this expectation can lead to stress, burnout, anxiety, and feeling like they are a failure. Social media makes this pressure even worse, as people constantly compare themselves to the perfect looking lives of people online. Stouffer writes the pressure is on to make sure everything does. This shows how young adults feel the heavy pressure to make every part of their lives perfect. Many of them feel like they are losing in this race of life if they're not happy enough, successful enough, or productive enough. Dr. Jeffrey Jensen Arnett, a psychologist and a professor, who created the term mentioned in the book Emerging Adulthood, and defined it as the age of identity explorations, possibilities, instability, feeling in between, and self focused age, typically spanning the ages of 18 to 25. He focuses on identity and transition from being a teenager to becoming an adult, which makes him a reliable expert on young adulthood. In the article, he states that although most emerging adults appear to thrive on this freedom, some find themselves lost and may begin to experience serious mental health problems. This connects to Stouffer's argument as many young adults are still trying to figure out who they are while also dealing with the pressure from school, work, relationship, and as society as a whole. Arnett's research shows that this stage of life can become emotionally difficult because young adults are trying to balance uncertainty about future as well as the pressure to succeed quickly in life. In the book, Stouffer explains that ordinary moments are often ignored because the society focuses too much on success and perfection, which creates a cycle where young adults feel exhausted and guilty whenever they try to rest or slow down. According to World Health Organization, 15.8 of young adults experience mental health problems. Few fallacies that I found in Chapter 1 were appeal to emotion and hasty generalization. Stouffer often uses emotional stories and experiences from young adults who struggles with burnout, pressure, and anxiety, and while these stories are real, it can sometimes make it seem like all young adults are struggling in the same way. Moving forward, Chapter 2 focuses mainly on hustle culture, the idea that people should always be working, improving, and chasing success. Stouffer explains that many young adults are taught to follow their passion and search for their dream jobs. But the reality of modern world often includes low wages, unstable jobs, debt, burnout, and unpaid internships. One important key term from this chapter is passion principle. In the article, it is defined as a popular schema that encourages prioritization of self-expressive and fulfilling work in career decision-making, even at the expense of financial stability. Hustle culture teaches people that they should sacrifice stability, rest, and even their mental health in order to succeed. Numerous young adults start to believe that if they're not persistently passionate about work, then they are somehow falling behind in life. Young adults were often told to work for the experience instead of the fair pay. This idea mostly affects young adults who cannot afford to work for free, make bad choices, or pursue their passion, like the breadwinners or people from low income communities. However, Stouffer explains that the hustle culture causes many people to accept unhealthy working conditions because they believe that passion should matter than financial survival. The chapter also highlights how modern society treats career as part of personal identity. Stouffer writes, work equals personhood. That shows many people begin to judge their value based on their career. In this chapter, The hustle culture glorifies self-sacrifice and overworking, ignoring the effects that comes with it. In their article, Dr. Erin Scheck, a sociology professor whose research focuses on work, inequality, and career culture, and Sophia Hiltner, a PhD candidate who studies employment and labor patterns, studies the work culture and job instability. They explain that work plays a much more expensive role in the lives and minds of workers than just a source of income. This offers Stouffer's argument that many young adults connect jobs to self-worth, identity, and purpose in life. It also explains the job instability during COVID-19 pandemic that caused many workers to rethink their priorities about work and careers, the idea of survival versus passion. Many people began valuing stability and mental health more than the dream job culture. One fallacy I found in Chapter 2 is the false dilemma fallacy. Stouffer sometimes present the issue as if young adults have only two options, which either to follow their dreams or to completely focuses on survival and financial security. In reality, many people try to balance passion, stability, ambition, and even mental health all at the same time. She also sometimes simplifies issues by presenting work culture in more extreme ways.
The problems that Rainford Stafford talks about in Chapter 3 is how many young adults feel that there is a waiting room before their life can actually start, which means that many feel that they have to cross a certain threshold in terms of economics, like trying to buy a home or having your own individual freedom. Stauffer continues on with this point by saying how moving away from home has been the traditional signal of gaining your own individual freedom because you're on your own and you feel as if you're finally starting off on your journey fully on your own. Yet many cannot attain this because of the economic hardships, causing many people who have full-time jobs to still live with their parents because they are unable to afford a place on their own. Stauffer includes the statistic that 550,000 people up to age 24 have experienced a homeless episode of a week or longer, according to statistics that were used from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. The connection I found to the real world in this chapter is the fact that the median home buying age for first-time home buyers is 40 years old, and the median age in general is 59 years old, according to the National Association of Realtors. This statistic is crazy to me because of how many people want to buy a home, and yet the median age to buy one is during the middle of your life, which makes it understandable as to why so many people feel they are in a waiting room because economically they cannot be self-sufficient. So the key takeaway that I had with this chapter is that many people feel disenfranchised when starting off because they cannot hit these benchmarks, making them feel as if they are behind in life when in reality many are facing the same type of pain. For Chapter 4, the problem that was discussed was that many young adults feel that they are not giving enough time towards their interests or hobbies, and instead trying to do activities that help further themselves. Stauffer talks about how long of a time it was since the last time she read a book primarily for the sake of pleasure, citing that it had been months uh, before she ever did such a thing, and how she was not given enough time towards other hobbies such as knitting, which she primarily did for the sake of pleasure. Which is why the claim she makes is that we don't have hobbies for the sole feeling of pleasure anymore. Instead, we may have hobbies that may be tied to trying to be doing better in life, such as reading self help books instead of fiction. The connection I found in this chapter to the real world was the fact that 4.8 hours is spent on average every day for teens in the United States using the seven most popular social media apps such as Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, according to the American Psychological Association. This really puts into perspective how much teens are using their formative years on a screen when instead they could be engaging in something more enriching that actually makes them feel way better. Since there are no benefits towards spending almost 5 hours on social media every day, and since these companies have engineered to keep us on their platform and make us waste our time by endlessly scrolling from video to video, a lot of people get this feeling that they are not dedicating their time enough on what's important, making them feel lost in a way. So, the key takeaway that I had with this chapter is that our attention has been monetized without us knowing it, and in order to take it back, we need to engage in hobbies such as reading or anything else other than spending 5 hours on social media, rather for the sake of pleasure than getting ahead in life.
The theme of Chapter 5 is perfectionism, the pressures that come with it, and how to feel enough. First, let's break down two key terms. The author defines perfectionism as the belief that doing it all perfectly feels like the only shot at things turning out okay. Moreover, she often uses the term hyper-individualism, which means to extremely focus on being self-reliant, oftentimes to an unhealthy degree. Regarding experts, the author brings up Thomas Kieran and Jessica Rothling Pryor. While both hold PhDs in psychology and specialize in perfectionism, Kieran is widely perceived as the world's leading expert on perfectionism. Additionally, she cites Andrew Hill, another expert in psychology, and Dr. Alfie Breland-Noble. Breland-Noble's work focuses on adolescent mental health. These individuals are trustworthy because of their academic credentials relating to human behavior and brain function. The negative impact that perfectionism has on our minds is made clear in a peer-reviewed meta-analysis titled The Perniciousness of Perfectionism. For context, one source interviewed the families of people who've committed suicide, and they found that 68.1% of them reported the deceased person having high expectations and demands, traits of perfectionism. In a similar source, researchers found that 56% of loved ones described the person who committed suicide as being perfectionistic. One ethical claim from this chapter is made by Pryor about how people of color gotta be 5 times better to be considered for half as much. This is backed by evidence not only from expert testimony, but also by a study demonstrating that African American students who've experienced racism were more likely in maladaptive perfectionism classes. While the author doesn't commit any fallacies herself, she points out society's fallacious expectations. For instance, she talks about how society makes us feel alone, like we are the only ones struggling, the only ones falling behind. Additionally, she states how this hyper-individualism tells us to manage all of our problems alone, and that the negative impact of perfectionism shouldn't be talked about. These are fallacies because they oversimplify perfectionism into an individual problem, as if the root of our struggles is solely because we didn't work hard enough. Everything discussed so far points to the ongoing youth mental health crisis. Applying some of the book's ideas, the author suggests that we be more open with our struggles, and reframing rest as not something to be earned, but something we all innately deserve. Moving on, Chapter 6 is all about finding meaning in our lives, asking questions like, who am I, and where do I belong? Let's begin by discussing the two important terms. The term meaning-making is the process in which one searches for their purpose. Secondly, deep community is one of the ways in which one can go about the process of meaning-making. Deep community is defined as a group in which one feels understood, supported, and feels comfortable being vulnerable in. As far as experts go, the author mentions Mona Abozina, Angie Thurston, and Casper ter Kuile. Abozina holds a PhD in applied child development, focusing on religion, development, and identity. On the other hand, Thurston and ter Kuile are fellows at Harvard Divinity School, working for a nonprofit that supports spiritual innovation. Ordinary people are cited as well. For example, she brings up Harper and Alexi, 2 women in their 20s. Now, who should we trust? Obviously, the experts, but that doesn't mean Harper and Alexi are insightful. Does having a place of belonging and being able to connect with others even matter? Yes, actually. Thurston, one of the experts, states that we are human beings who crave connection as deeply as water and air and die without it. In a meta-analysis titled Loneliness and Social Isolation as Risk Factors for Mortality, researchers found that social isolation, living alone, and loneliness were linked to a 29%, 32%, and 26% increased mortality rate, respectively. The researchers concluded that there's sufficient evidence revealing that those who lack social connections are at risk of premature death. Furthermore, the author brings up an ethical claim by saying everyone should have the ability to explore their purpose and identity in whichever way they please, without being forced or judged. This is backed by Abozina, as she says, emerging adulthood is a time in which we start asking deeper questions in regards to who we are. Again, the author herself makes no fallacies, but points out one of society's fallacious claims. For instance, society puts us in a false dichotomy about how religion is the only way in which one can find meaning. Religion is definitely one way, but like the author said, it's not the only way anymore. Altogether, this chapter connects to the current loneliness epidemic. The author's advice is to understand yourself better through reflection and to find your deep community with your existing interests serving as a guide.
Hello, my name is Nasha Oshukumai, and today I'm going to be covering chapter 7 and 8. So, in chapter 7, talks about the lifestyle of using social media. In today's society, we all use social media as like for a lot of things. We use it for work, we use it for business, we use it for communications. But sometimes that can also lead to the downfall of social media because we look at social media as like our escape. We look at it as like our own main thing that's going to like get us through life. But sometimes social media is doesn't always have the answers that we need. It is not the lifestyle that we should all be looking forward to because not everybody what you see on social media is exactly living the best lifestyle you wish you were living in. Sometimes it could be a nightmare, but it all really comes down to you to ask yourself if this is the kind of life you want to be in. And sometimes social media can be used for a great thing, but I would say I recommend just use social media as like a side thing, but also like an experience thing for you to experience your own life. In chapter 8, a clinic psychology senior director of the research, Diana Ramon, and Sophia Nordkesher talks about the influence on social media on behavior and how that one affects on dating. And the chapter 8 talks about dating and finding love at first sight and being real with love. Because true love comes from within you and not being willing to change yourself just for somebody else to exactly appreciate who you are. It talks about how many relationships don't really last long, whether it has to do with accountability or vulnerability, but also with being able to trust yourself to see if you are ready for dating. Because dating is a preparation of commitment to your loved one, but also it's the beginning of helping you build up your character. So when the moment happens when you find that special one.
Hi, my name is Mason Blair, and today I will be covering chapters 9 and 10 from An Ordinary Age by Rainsford Stauffer. These chapters discuss the issues of self-care and loneliness as they relate to young adulthood. Chapter 9 discusses the concept of self-care. Many people have turned to self-care as a means of releasing the pressures that they are facing in their lives, yet often the idea of self-care has become individual and commercialized. For instance, Stauffer points out that self-care often becomes another thing to do, another thing to be. This adds to the pressure that individuals feel within their lives rather than releasing it. Stauffer also makes a main claim within the chapter that self-care has become shifted away from the idea of real care for individuals and into the commercialization of that idea. For instance, many self-care industries sell self-care kits, apps, skincare products, routines, and more. However, Stauffer suggests that real care for individuals includes activities like calling a friend, getting carry-out food, and even getting enough sleep for the individual. Stauffer also makes an ethical claim within the chapter that it is wrong to place the responsibility of fixing individuals' problems upon those individuals themselves. For instance, she states that people cannot relax away overwork, fatigue, or plain old stress. This is an ethical claim because the individual deserves to be cared for rather than being asked to take care of themselves. Furthermore, the arguments made by Stauffer in this chapter are supported through her personal experiences, interviews with others, and her discussion of history of self-care. One outside source that helps to support the discussion of self-care in this chapter comes from the World Health Organization, the WHO. The WHO states that self-care is the ability of the individual, families, and communities to maintain their health, prevent disease, and to cope with illness, with or without the support of a health or care worker. This definition of self-care is important because it includes the idea of support from others within an individual's community. The WHO is a reputable source on these issues because they are a health organization, the World Health Organization. That's not in the transcript. Sorry. The concept of self-care is also related to current issues in the real world today. For instance, the wellness industry and social media is filled with information on self-care and how to incorporate it into one's life. One way to apply the ideas of software to the real world is through the issue of burnout. Many individuals who suffer from burnout feel pressure to perform and to care for themselves in a way that will allow them to relax from the demands that they are placed on within their jobs. Yet, Stauffer suggests that a better solution to the issue of a burnout, rather than encouraging individuals, is to focus upon self care, is to change their environments that create such stress upon those individuals. Chapter 10 discusses the issue of loneliness within young adulthood and why community is important for those individuals. Within this chapter, Stauffer makes a distinction between loneliness and being alone. For instance, she states that through research that loneliness is a distressing feeling when the individual feels as if their social needs within their communities are not being met. This is important in understanding the distinction of loneliness in this text. Furthermore, Stauffer's main claim is that loneliness is an issue for young adults due to the changes that they experience during their young adulthood years. For instance, young adults often have to move away from home, find jobs, start contributing to society, and possibly even lose friends or social circles. Stauffer also argues that social media often presents the appearance of loneliness issues being resolved, yet still leaving the individuals feeling alone. Stauffer's argument that one simply cannot watch another individual's life and claim that they're connected to those individuals is a critical point being made in this chapter. Beyond the main claims that Stauffer makes, there is also an ethical argument being made within the chapter that those individuals should be allowed to connect with others within their communities rather than being judged for doing so. Society should not treat loneliness as a weakness. This argument is supported by interviews with individuals, research studies, and loneliness and social connection, and Casey Killiam's work on social connection and community. These arguments are supported through these methods because they provide direct evidence and examples to back up Stauffer's arguments regarding loneliness. Furthermore, another outside source for loneliness is that of the United States Surgeon General's Social Connection Advisory. This document suggests that social connection is crucial to the health of individuals, communities, and society as a whole. The Surgeon General Advisory reports that social isolation can increase the risk of premature mortality by 29%, and poor social relationships can be linked to a 32% increased risk in stroke and a 29% increased risk in heart rate. These statistics are important in relation to Stauffer's text because they suggest that loneliness is a true issue for individuals today. The Office of U.S. Surgeon General is one of the most reputable health sources. An issue related to loneliness today is the loneliness epidemic within young adults who spend much of their time online yet often feel lonely in their real lives. Therefore, as Stauffer argues within her text, the solution to loneliness is not to throw oneself into every social situation within one's community. Rather, the individual should recognize the need for community within their lives and begin to form connections with those individuals within those communities. This argument is important in the real world because it provides an understanding of loneliness and how individuals can better manage their loneliness through these methods. In terms of fallacies, there is no major logical fallacy made within Stauffer's arguments. For instance, her main arguments are based upon interviews and her discussions with other experts in the field of loneliness. There is a possibility of overgeneralization when discussing young adults as a whole. However, this does not ruin her argument because she acknowledges the diversity of individuals within young adulthood. These two chapters work together to make a strong argument regarding loneliness and self-care within young adulthood. For instance, Chapter 9 discusses how individuals are told to take care of themselves, yet Chapter 10 discusses the results of a lack of connection and community. Overall, then, Stauffer argues that individuals need more than self-care, self-improvement, or even simply focusing on their appearances. They also need rest, support, and connection to others within the community as individuals.
Hello, my name is Christian Castellan Santana, and I'll be going over chapters 11 and 12 from the book An Ordinary Age. A few themes that resonated in chapter 11 were that the 4-year plan just isn't for everyone. Everyone has different socioeconomical factors, a different support system, and different mental health barriers. Another thing that was noted was there was a change in education after the Vietnam War, where the federal government gave vocational schools less funding. For-profit schools increased the cost of education, and schools were pushing the 4-year plan as if it was the only way to be successful. This forever changing structure even went into high schools, where high schools now had their students taking courses that prepared them for college. Vocational schools and community college now came with negative stigmas, often looking like it was a lesser education. A new theme was also emerging, the fear of failing, where students felt that 1 or 2 failing grades would derail their chances of success. In fact, the book notes that the 4-year program doesn't necessarily guarantee success. It noted that 1 in 6 students that had enrolled in college in 2012 didn't have a degree 6 years later. 41% of new grads had a job that didn't need a degree, and 33.8% as a whole also were in the same category. Students were left with $29,000 to $37,000 worth of debt, and the traditional student was changing. The age of students was increasing. A new platform, the online platform, allowed for colleges to have more flexibility in student schedules. Some of them took advantage of this and optimized their priorities, which allowed them to return to college. Unferth et al. In 2012 had an article that noted that first-generation and low-income students had a harder time acclimating to college. First-generation and low-income students often had to work more hours and had limited incomes, and that one-fourth of first-generation students often dropped out after the first year. Another article written by Bozic, 2007, noted that low-income families were unable to provide financial support for their kids in college. And they also noted that in order to make up for this, the students had to work more hours, which often meant that they had less time to study. Another article written by Kiefer et al. In 2022 noted that students of first generation and parents were unable to assist them with college decisions as they had not gone to college before, and also noted that the parents pushed for their kids to go into more practical majors that often led to a job. It also noted that the first generation and low-income students also had a 43% ratio of being underemployed. Chapter 12 was more of a message than an actual chapter. There's a few things that the author went over that really resonated within the book. One of them is that you decide what's important. You shouldn't allow external pressures and external milestones to establish who you are. Instead, you should be the one on establishing personal standards. You should acknowledge your accomplishments and find happiness in the present. You should let go of things that could have been, and you should embrace your imperfections. It's okay to not have things figured out at this time in life. Instead, you should acknowledge who you are and accept that there's always changing circumstances within this time of life. And it's not the milestones that define who we are, but the ordinary, everyday, mundane things that define who we are. In an article written by Wright at Waldenstone, this article noted that traditional young adults typically started long-term careers, got married, and had children within their early 20s. But in recent years, this has transitioned into something different, something where young adulthood now looks increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. This makes milestones less likely to define adulthood nowadays. Another article written by Grinnell et al. In 2023 saw that young adults during this time are expected to take care of themselves, manage time, stress, and prioritize their commitments. And it's all on their own, where previously they had a support system like their parents to help them with this. They also noted that routines help protect against mental illness and can also be an indicator of overall health functioning throughout someone's lifespan.